What's up? Welcome on back. This is your host, Siris King. In this segment, I'm going to talk about angels from the concept of ATRs, or African traditional religions. You know, when I first started this ATR series, I did it with the intention, well, I did it for the reason because I felt that either most people, when they think of African traditional religions, they think of maybe, something bad, right? That's the first level, right? Which is easy though, because for me, at this point, there's so many people doing videos I wouldn't say real, but on the most realistic version of the African religions or traditional religions that they can get, or systems, right? I don't really like to use the word religion, but African spiritual systems that they can have, that they have access to, right? So in a sense, many people are doing that. And honestly, even when you think of, let's say you think of negative connotation when you think of African traditional religions, that's usually just because of, I don't like to use the word, but it is real. It is a concept, white supremacy. Meaning, when one culture takes over another culture, then you can rewrite the history. And that's what's been done. So for me, it's obvious that if you think voodoo, you think something bad. I always thought that's not my job to get you to think of it good. You have to go in your mind and, I guess re-erase everything that you've been taught in that sense, right? And that has nothing to do with even just spirituality. That just has to do with life. Like, I can guarantee you, if you think that, then you probably have other things in your life that you probably is not organic for the way you see things. As much as people may talk about voodoo or have negative connotations when they hear that word, I mean, voodoo in a lot of different ways has you more in tune with nature than, let's be honest, than Christianity. And this is not a diss to Christianity. I'm just keeping it real. If you go into which system is more in tune with nature, get you to think of the trees, get you to think of, the animals, the plants, the rivers, the sea, it will be voodoo. And if you just want to go into science, just keep it 100. Science is like, hey, when you die, you go back into the earth, into the land. And then voodoo, and you're like, when you die, you become one with the world, with the earth, and you journey with the spirits and ancestors. But it's not heaven the way people think it is. So for me, I always looked at it like, why do I have to defend that? Right? If you believe that it's bad, you need to check your own self. Right? So for me, when I've come up with a series of African traditional religions, it's not really to defend the African systems from the crowd I just described, because it's not, right? Because the crowd I just described, they're going to think it's bad regardless of what I say anyway. But really, what it comes down to is to the truthful seeker who may have had partial contact with African traditional systems. And when I say partial contact, this is the real reason why I did this series. And it's because, from my angle, African traditional systems is probably the oldest spirituality in the world. And because Africa is a continent, not a country, and it's huge, there is not even, I can't even say there's like one common system that I could say, oh, well, this is this system, right? It's a continent of many different spiritual systems. The only thing I could say is that, though there may be disagreements, there might be certain things that they all agree with, like, the importance of the ancestors. Then you might have some systems who might prop up exalted ancestors that outsiders would call gods. Not really the right way to still describe them, but outsiders could call them gods. And then you might have other systems that might be more focused on animism. You might have other systems that focus more on trees, right? You have different systems might focus on different things, but they all would agree on the importance of nature and ancestors and the land, right? And passing on the knowledge. And the problem with African traditional religions, from my point of view, is that it's very hard to really actually repackage them in a book. And because the African systems really work a lot on experience. And this is why it's so easy to demonize the African systems sometimes, because if you don't experience certain things, if you're coming at them from the Western mind, or even from almost any other culture, because the African culture is so old compared to all the other human cultures, that it's easy to, I guess you could say it would be easy to judge it, or easy for you to say it sounds crazy. So traditionally, if you were to come and put that in a book, a person who's writing a book doesn't, for the most part, is usually not even writing it, reading the book is reading to acquire knowledge, and usually trying to acquire knowledge they haven't experienced yet. So imagine if you never learned to drive a car. and you just read in the book about driving a car. It's not the same. And when you look and say, well, science, of course, you got to put that in book. Yes, but even science is about experimentation. So one of the reasons why, like if you think about it, one of the reasons why when you get learned men, right? When you get people who read a lot of books and they're very intelligent, for the most part, if you look at the subjects, they tend to be more well read in history, maybe alternative medicine, politics, tend to be subjects that, though you need experience, you can actually read books and acquire enough knowledge in them that you could keep anyone from those fields honest, right? And what I mean by that is, I don't have to go to school for political science to be able to read some political books, read it from different angles, right? That's the important thing. Reading it from different points of view. And you go back and you can, for the most part, hold your own against someone who knows political science, right? Same thing with even alternative medicine. When you get a doctor, right? And this is Western medicine now, but for the most part, people from alternative medicine, from alternative medical background, can read a few alternative medical books. And because Western medicine is so corrupted by greed, you can almost, compete with a doctor in terms of information. Of course, mind you, I'm not saying you're a doctor. I don't think anyone should go to you for health advice, but I'm saying in terms of just general information, right? In the end of the day, the doctor would win, right? But if you talk about, let's say, the concept of eating meat, talk about fast food, junk food, the doctor will be potentially be partial to those things, where the person who's studying alternative medicine might be on the right side because the medical practitioner may not realize that his institution has been corrupted by greed. Again, I'm not telling you that if you get sick, you shouldn't go to the doctor. You should go to the doctor. But I'm just bringing it up to say that in certain fields, you could be a learned man, a learned woman, and compete with people who may have went to school in those fields. Science is very hard to do that. Because even if you read a whole bunch of science books, when it comes to a lot of science is math, it's almost impossible to get the mathematics on your own. And I can almost guarantee you that you're not going to be doing experiments, right? Science is a lot about experiments. So that's why when the scientist is talking, he or she can often ask the questions that's totally outside of what they came to talk about, right? So they could be talking about electrons and atoms. And then you ask them about molecules. Or you ask them general questions about other fields. Even though physicists might tell you if you ask them a geological question, they may not know it, but they will still be able to answer the basics about geology, right? The basics about biology. Why? Because science is a lot about experimentation. Same thing with African traditional religions. It has nothing to do with if you're not from the bloodline, because there's plenty of people in Africa who don't practice the traditions anymore. But if you're reading it mainly from a book, it's the problem. And either the person writing the book is a learned man or learned woman, or the person could be from a tradition, but normally they're from a tradition that may have lost their way, because sometimes people don't really realize that traditions, like anything else, have to almost be maintained. And if you don't maintain them, they can fade or they can be depowered. So I explain all these things to get into the African concept of angels. And the reason why I say this is because the person, the person who, let's say, is looking at angels from the Indo-European construct will say the angels don't exist in African religions. Or the person who's actually also influenced by the European concept may think that the exalted ancestors that some people mislabeling as gods are angels, right? So they would say, well, instead of saying Christ or Michael, we just say Shango. And both concepts are wrong. The concept of angel actually does exist in some African traditional religions. Like I said, Africa is a big continent. A lot of the younger systems wouldn't have access to this, but the systems, the indigenous systems of the East, the Central African systems, under the Pygmies, not the Negroids, but the Pygmies, and or Negroid tribes. Let's say Negroid scientific, but let's say Bantu tribes, right? No, not the Bantu tribes. But we're talking about the Pygmy tribes, some indigenous tribes of East Africa, some indigenous tribes of South Africa is what I'm talking about, right? Not Sangoma, but some of the tribes, some of the information that gave birth to Sangoma. In those systems, yes, there is a concept that you can later see that it's equivalent to the concept of angels in the West. But the difference is, in the African concept, in the African systems, what has happened is that they said that angels was symbolic of spirits that are very powerful, that the traditional person cannot access safely. Meaning, you had to refine your energy to access what people are calling angel. And because of that, usually only the higher priest will even have access to that knowledge. So much so that when I used to talk about the Sand people or the Bushmen in South Africa, the Pygmies occupying Central Africa, I mean, some of them go up to the east. Some of them even, when they began to split, go into Asia, right? So you got the Pygmies, you got the Bushmen, and then you got, I mean, some people don't like the word, Afro-Asiatic tribes, right? Which, you know, of the East Africa, but the East African indigenous tribes, how about that? Those are the three oldest groups. And in those groups, when you start to see systems below them, meaning systems, African systems that are younger than them, the concept of the type of spirit I'm talking about almost fades away, almost disappears. Why? Because in even the systems I'm describing, only the higher priests would even interact with those type of spirits because, like I said, they were so powerful. You had to refine yourself, refine your own energies, or purify your own energies, usually with water, believe it or not. Sometimes plants too, like, you know, but usually with water. You have to purify yourself in order to access those energies. Hence, that's why you get, even eventually when the Romans talk about baptism, you can see where that comes from. Yeah, they got it from Egypt, but I think people forget that by the time you told me Egypt was just a place where a lot of the knowledge of Africa it was kind of like a meeting place of a different systems in Africa, and they all, in terms of spiritual knowledge, right? And eventually, and the problem is, because when historians will say Egypt, they'll say, yeah, but the Egyptians didn't really have contact with tribes in the central or the west. It didn't matter because, remember, Egyptians were descendants of Nubians. The Nubians did. So the Nubians would take all that knowledge and package it into one system. Or, in a sense, you could say what works and what doesn't work. That's probably better, right? And in a sense, what happens is that when you're looking at even, yes, the Christians got the baptisms from Egyptians, but baptism, where I'm describing, was something that existed in African traditional religions outside Egypt. That's the when I like to talk about African traditional religions. I add Egypt, but I try not to focus on it as much because I think that's the mistake that a lot of people, especially in America, I should say, do, where they don't really, you know, they don't get into West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, just Egypt. And I like to, and for me, Egypt is just one place in the mighty continent where spirituality was the origin of spirituality. So for me, when you focus on Egypt, and especially when Egypt is the place that had more influence from outsiders, you're not really helping the cause for African traditional religions. You're just basically almost catering to pressure from the outside. So yes, a lot of times I try to get into Egypt a little bit, but I try not to focus on it as much if I could avoid it. And I try to focus on other African systems. That's just me, right? So in the older systems, yes, a lot of times dealing with those type of spirits was usually associated with, I don't want to say baptism, well, what the West is calling baptism, but being able to understand water and purifying yourself. So in the beginning, most older tribes, only the real higher priests even have an awareness of what those energies are that people call the angel. Number one. Number two, eventually when they gave birth to younger African systems, those type of spirits wouldn't even be, they may not even have an awareness of those type of spirits. And the reason why I bring this up is because when you deal with the concept of angels and the West taking that concept, not understanding it, what ends up happening is that you just cause, I don't want to say systems that are dead, but systems. So for instance, when somebody, like if you deal with anyone who does any type of shamanism, any type of even low magic, a lot of them doubt the power of angels, right? And I always used to say, why do they get the power of angels? Angels are crazy powerful. Well, it's because when you look at angels based on how the Western mind looks at it, you will doubt it. There's no question. Why would you doubt it? Well, think about it. Just think about it. You're dealing with something that you don't really understand, right? And what ends up happening is that you end up, like, let's say you try to invoke certain things or certain forces or angelic forces. You end up not invoking anything. And the reason why I say that is because all I have to do is look at what's presented as angelic information, right? The Kabbalists definitely have it right. So I'm not going to talk about them as much, but like, if you take New Age people who look at Kabbalah, look at Christianity, and you come up with all these new versions of Michael and Gabriel and all these other names, right? And even when you look at the Christian concept, if you look at the Christian concept, really, you have to go into non-biblical canon to get a lot of information about angels. In the Bible, only 4 angels are mentioned. Some people say 3, but I think it's 4. I'm pretty sure Uriel is mentioned at least once, but I know for sure Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael are. And what happens is when you get the concept of angels, you usually start to go into canon that's outside the biblical sources. So that's telling you that even though Christianity is, when people think angel is from them, right? Most of the time, they don't even push that concept as much. That's how you can tell that something is wrong, because angels are very plentiful spirits. Like angelic spirits, if you want to take it to what I spoke about before, are more cosmic forces. So when you combine the concept of cosmic forces to the African traditional mindset, that's basically saying forces that traditionally are beyond the natural forces that you encounter in nature. And forces that and this is why to me, why it's kind of linked to the concept of how some people talked about demons. Because you're dealing with forces that, if you don't know what you're doing, can cause great harm. Meaning, when you bring those forces down here, if you don't know what you're doing, you're lucky if nothing happens. If you actually get lucky and invoke those forces, and you bring it down here, and you don't know what you're doing, those forces can become corrupted. That's why when you do the concept of good and bad, that concept doesn't exist the way the West does in almost any indigenous culture, not even outside Africa. Most indigenous systems just deal with basically, I don't want to say energy, but for them, spirits deal with you based on how you are as a person. Meaning based on your knowledge, based on your spiritual strength. That's how a spirit's going to deal with you. Based on a key understanding of every spirit has its own domain. So if you bring a spirit into this domain, you have to know it. You have to understand, is the spirit compatible with this domain? That's where you see where the large separation between how the African systems view angels and how the European systems view angels. In the European systems, they'll say angels are messages of God. Angels basically, if they even deal with it, can't do no right, can't do no wrong. Right? Angels are perfect. But then they have stories of angels falling, which kind of contradicts itself. Whereas in the African systems, it's much more human based, when I say human based, much more grounded, right? Where, again, I'm talking about African systems that actually understand the concept I'm talking about. Remember, if you come with some African systems, specifically in the West African systems, some of them might know the Fauna and Ewe tribes and Voodoo. They might know the concept of angels. The problem, they might not say the word angels. They might say Zenge, right? But the difference is that even in Voodoo, because Voodoo is community based, this is where I think a lot of people mess up when they try to understand Voodoo. Because Voodoo is community based, if I'm doing Voodoo in Chicago, forget even that. You go to different parts of Haiti, different parts of Benin, different parts of Togo, right? And you see, like, people don't even know that there's voodoo even in Cuba and Brazil, right? People don't know that. And when you go but even in different parts of the same country, it changes a bit. Yes, there are going to be some things that are always going to be standards, always going to be the same. No question. That's why you would call it voodoo. But especially when it comes to certain spirits, certain loa, certain communities might deal with one and other ones may not deal with the other one. For instance, even when you talk about Haitian voodoo, and Haitian voodoo is 21 different nations A lot of spirits, right? Even though 21 different nations, the nations that are dominant in voodoo tend to be the Rada spirits, the Petro spirits, and the Nago spirits. The Rada spirits tend to be fauna airware, 2 tribes in Africa, usually from Benin and Togo. The Nago spirits, which is Yoruba based, and then the Petro spirits, which tend to be spirits from the Americas, sometimes spliced to spirits from Central Africa, but for the most part from spirits from the Americas, what they got from the Tainos, who some of their spirituality got intertwined into voodoo. So even though they say 21 nations, it's usually those 3 are dominant, right? So for instance, no matter where you go in voodoo, right? And it's funny, I'm going to say voodoo in this part of the world, because in Africa, they may not do the Taino spirits, right? So even that is kind of tells a lot. But within the Americas, those 3 nations, in any system of voodoo, you're going to always find those. Literally, everyone knows those spirits. Even if you have some that you prefer than others, you would always know it. But then when you deal with the other 18, right, you'd be surprised how many people in voodoo don't know about, the spirits from Madagascar. The spirits from the Samgambian region of West Africa, right? Even some spirits from Congo. Some spirits from Ethiopia. That's always intertwined into voodoo. They wouldn't even know about that. So a lot of times the Naja angels, voodoo, I would still say would still know it, but some voodoo practitioners, but it wouldn't be to the forefront. Like I said, it tends to be, those 3 nations tend to be dominant. So when I talk about ATRs from African traditional concepts, it's usually talking about the 3 or 4 older tribes in the West, in the East, Central Africa, and the South. And they're the ones who understand about purify oneself before you interact with those energies. And how when those energies are brought to this world, those energies usually like to come in and come out. So that they like to come in, do what you ask or what's needed, and leave. That's different, because those energies are usually cosmic in nature, a much higher force than we are, and they don't like to stay. And so then that's when you will see the difference, where in the West, when they put those spirits on a pedestal, like I said, they're lucky if nothing happens, right? But if they actually successfully invoke them, sometimes the spirits can corrupt you, right? I mean, not corrupt you on purpose, but the energy feedback is so strong, you become corrupted. Or you become corrupted, and then you get other spirits to kind of latch on, because your energy is all over the place. Your energy is almost like leaking. It's almost like you're leaking energy in that sense. And when that's the case, what ends up starts to happen is then you get in the concepts how angels and demons are starting to get intertwined. Because in the ATR systems, they would say, yeah, if you open that door, bring them here, and then they stay here too long, they can become corrupted, hence demons. So then that's why even where in the Indo-European systems, they would have a big discrepancy between angels and demons. In the African systems, again, not all, but in some, they would say more that a lot of times what you're seeing demons is just people in this realm mishandling those angelic forces, and the forces themselves being here too long, getting corrupted. So in a sense, what ends up happening is that just like the concept of hell was something that was seen when Europeans went to Africa and saw what they perceived as the concept of hell, right? Which is not hell, honestly, but that's how they perceived it. Hell in African systems was just a place that, not even hell, like I don't like to use the word, but what they describe as hell is just a place that the Aztecs even talk about that, and the Mayans even talk about that. When the Mayans and Aztecs talk about the underworld, it doesn't really mean it's a place that's evil the way Westerners perceive evil. It's just a place where, programs go when they are no longer used in our world. And you could look at that as hell if you want, but that's not how they looked at it. And that's one thing where there's actually still a relationship or a link between Central American, Mexican, and South American systems and African systems, right? And that's where they kind of agree, especially in the Central American and Mexican systems, indigenous, where you talk about the concept of the underworld. Yes, it was a place where those spirits are probably not spirits you want to deal with. But when you just label them good and evil, still not totally getting it. And when the European came and saw that concept, they said, oh, this is hell. And then now we have a whole version of hell, right? That now we have hell that's basically a whole concept that may not be exactly correct. But the problem is, as even Hermeticism, which is actually European magic. So when I don't want to hit anyone to hear this and think I'm, get into some racism, or I'm saying European systems don't have a place. They do. Because in the Hermetic systems, they actually kind of talk about that, where they say when a person dies, their mind recreates whatever they expect them to get at death. So yeah, no question. If you go into spiritual right now and you talk about the concept of hell, there is something there because people have been taught that, and they've created an illusionary version of that concept in the inner worlds. Yes, that's definitely true. But in terms of the original meaning of hell, they got that when they eventually came across, certain African tribes. And then later on, certain Mesoamerican tribes too. I don't want to just say it to Africa, but certain Mesoamerican tribes as well. And eventually, hell became something that now it kind of stands on its own. Like, people swear they know what hell is, and it's a hard time getting them to think they don't. Getting them to see that concepts come from something else. Same thing with this. And the angelic concept. The angels, the way people see it. So then that's why you get these different, like you might get someone who may be obsessed with the flaws of European spirituality, which to me, spirituality, all continents have flaws, Africa included. Because anytime you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with flaws, right? But you got people who be obsessed with the flaws in European systems. And then they would say angels don't exist because that concept doesn't exist within Africa. It's not totally true. The concept doesn't exist the way, like when the Europeans took the concept, they made their own. And that concept of a dude with wings, no, that may not exist. Yes. But the concept of the spirits, that these higher level spirits that you usually need nature to purify, whether it's nature, whether it's plants, special herbs, particularly water, sometimes going up in the mountains, right? Some African systems, caves and mountains in isolation. Sometimes you have to go through these things to be able to talk to those spirits. And you see that later on when, even within the Bible, when you see people going in mountains and caves and talking to God. See, people don't really realize that all Kabbalah really is, and Sufism too. A lot of Sufism is coming from Central Asian concepts, Central Asian shamanism. 99 names of Allah exist in Mongolia and Tibet, right? Kazakhstan. If you look at the shamanism dealing with that, they have 99, especially Mongolia, 99 spirits in nature. So a lot of Sufism in the beginning was coming from Central Asia. Kabbalah at the beginning was coming from African concepts written down. So when you see people in the Bible or in the Quran going into caves, going into mountains, meditating, that is symbolic of the same concept where the older African tribes said, hey man, I'm just keeping it real. Hey man, when you gotta deal with the angelic concepts, with angelic spirits, you gotta purify yourself in nature, either through water, either through pure air, the air of a certain caliber, which you would get in the mountains, in a cave, where you learn to generate your own inner light in darkness. And if you do that successfully, then you can talk to those spirits. So in a sense, while I'm making this video, what I'm basically saying. Well, the problem is, from my angle, before, people tend to be obsessed with angels. And this is actually come from the European construct. Before, you might get lucky. And like I said, Kabbalah, Hermeticism sort of does it right. Especially Hermeticism, Hermetic magic. I would even say Wicca, honestly, too, where they have such a ceremonial way of using the elements that you can, I don't want to say get lucky, but you can use that to purify yourself enough that you could begin to deal with angelic intelligences. But even if that's the case, you have to kind of go through nature first. The whole point. You want to really deal with angels, serious angelic magic, and serious angelic energies. You gotta have to kind of deal with nature first, because all they are is spirits. If you look at them as a concept of angels, the way it's been taught, no, that's an illusion. But if you deal with the concept of higher spirits or higher intelligences, no, that's very real. But you have to purify yourself before you could actually deal with that. And I think that's the difference. And it's just so interesting because when Christianity, and actually all three Abrahamic religions, but particularly Judaism and Christianity, talk about the fall, I mean, they're basically saying that. And what are they saying? You can't connect to God because you fell and you have to repent and be reborn again. Well, if angels are God's messengers, then they're basically saying the same thing. It's just that the rhetoric seems different. So people ask me, at this video, people ask me, do the concept of angels exist in African traditional religions? And I say, yeah, they do. And I think if you just say, well, if the African system has gods, and again, I don't like to use that word, but some people perceive it as that, or exalted ancestors, or God forms, particularly, which are programs that are used to in the place of knowledge of the elements, right? So if you don't know about the elements, you make a God form, the goddess of water, the god of fire, right? So yeah, a lot of African systems might have God forms, might have, I guess you could say, exalted ancestors in certain positions, or might even have a human type construct of, or that's symbolic of being able to harness energy from a certain either element, a certain landmass, all these different type of things I'm describing. It's related, but it's not the same as the raw angelic energies, which it tends to be. I mean, if you want to say cosmic, you can, but intelligences that are so refined and so strong that you have to have a special type of connection to nature to actually invoke those successfully. And like I said, most people are lucky when they invoke them, nothing happens because they don't have the right setup. For other people, when they invoke them, you bring those type of intelligences here, they don't last. I mean, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to send them back. Stay here too long. Then you get in the whole concept of demons. So yes, angels definitely do exist in African traditional systems, especially the older ones, which those older systems were not transported with the slave trade. So when you're trying to get them, for the most part, when you're trying to find counterparts within the Americas, if you get the concept of angels within America, within the systems of the Americas, you get exceptions, some types of voodoo. But other than that, when you get the concept of angels in the American base or the Americas, not just in North America, but North America, South America, Central America, that angelic concept is usually coming from that system being interacting with European systems and mingling knowledge together. So yeah, they might have the concept of angel, but the concept of angels based on those systems will still be somewhat closer to the European construct of angels. The angelic concept I'm talking about, based on the old African systems, it's much older and it's a much more advanced type of knowledge when it comes to angels, and it's knowledge that actually still fits with what Western Hermeticists say when they talk about the fall, or even Gnostics who practice magic, kind of like more Martinists. People who practice Martinism would say where angelic energies tend to be much stronger, so you have to purify yourself before you deal with them. So in a sense, all systems, a lot of people are saying the same thing. It's just that you get different cultural interpretations, and through the cultural interpretations, the message gets distorted. But if you do your research and you really understand it, they're saying the same thing. Some of them just have a different understanding of it. And that comes down to the fact of if you don't know where the origin of whatever you're dealing with comes from, you might be dealing with distortion. And it's funny because sometimes it doesn't even mean that if you're coming from the younger version, it means it's worse. Sometimes the younger version could get it right. But even if the younger version gets it right, you still have to kind of be aware of the original source. So hope this helps. Till next time. Peace.